Republicans in Florida have now mandated that schools teach students that black people benefited from slavery and that black people perpetrated acts of mob violence in the struggle for civil rights. Intrigued? Then click that like, subscribe, and the alert bell, and maybe check out my Patreon, and enjoy the video. Folks, what is going on in Florida? Seriously, under the leadership of Ron DeSantis and I believe a Republican supermajority, Florida, Republicans are determined to make Florida an authoritarian right-wing hellscape. They're determined to make it possible because the way they are legislating, the way they are acting, they are trying to pervade the lives of every Floridian and try to wage every right-wing culture war front they possibly can. So they're waging war on Disney, their biggest tourist attraction and biggest employer. They passed the regressive and homophobic and transphobic Don't Say Gay law, which they assured us was all about just keeping education about sex and gender relegated to age-appropriate levels, but now has applied to high school as well. They are waging wars against fictional enemies like critical race theory and another fictional enemy like the left's supposed war against gas stoves. The left is coming for your gas stoves, people. Even though 90% of Floridians don't have gas stoves in their homes. Ron DeSantis went out of his way to offer a tax credit to protect gas stoves against the woke mob. This is the sort of crap that they're doing in Florida because, again, they can't compete on the record. And they've also been waging a war against education, right? And if you need any additional proof of that, look no further. I want to play this clip, and then we're going to dive into it.
Please table this rule and revise it to make sure that my history, our history, is being told factually and completely. And please, do not, for the love of God, tell kids that slavery was beneficial because I can guarantee you it most certainly was not. Thank you.
So yeah, this gentleman here is protesting a new mandate by the Florida Department of Education, which requires some very intriguing views on the instruction of slavery in particular, and also the fight for civil rights. So, according to the Washington Post, the Florida State Board of Education approved new rules Wednesday for how black history will be taught in public schools that critics are decrying as a step backward. And as we dive into it, you'll see just how backward this step is. The updated standards say students should learn that enslaved people developed skills that could be applied for their personal benefit, and that in teaching about mob violence against black residents, instructors should note acts of violence perpetrated against and by African Americans. This is insane. It's absolutely insane. It's offering a very sanitized, incredibly offensive view of history to try to create false equivalences in both sides' issues that are relatively one-sided morally. So again, this is part of a push by DeSantis and Republicans. State legislature has passed a raft of new laws backed by Republican presidential candidate Ron DeSantis, who contends the measures remove woke indoctrination and empower parents. The laws ban the teaching of critical race theory and forbid teachers from offering instructions that make other students feel guilt because of actions committed by others in the past. Now, teachers shouldn't try to make people of any color feel guilt. And as far as we know, they're not. Now, sometimes students might report feeling guilt as they discover and as they learn about U.S. history, but that's incidental. That's not intentional. That's not the purpose. And people, of course, are not responsible for the acts of their ancestors and their predecessors and people who look like them with whom they have no relation hundreds of years ago. White people today are not responsible for slavery. No one's saying that. Absolutely no one's saying that because these laws are intended to address straw men, things that aren't happening. And now we're seeing it go one step further. So the fact of the matter is that, let me give you an example that the article cites. More than a dozen speakers at Wednesday's board meeting opposed the changes, including State Senator Geraldine Thompson, who helped pass a law in 2020 that requires schools to teach lessons about the Okosi Massacre. The incident in 1920 began when several black students attempted to vote and ended with as many people as 60 people dead, making it the deadliest instance of Election Day violence in U.S. history. Thompson said the new curriculum suggests the massacre was sparked by violence from African Americans, not against, but from African Americans. That's blaming the victims. State Representative Anna Eskanami said that she was concerned about inaccuracies in the new standards, including instructing that enslaved people develop skills that could be helpful. It's an accurate and a scary standard for us to establish. The board passed the new standards unanimously. That's where we are, folks. That is where, well, Florida is, at least. The regressively conservative Department of Education is mandating that we offer sanitized versions of extraordinary acts of moral decay in the history of this country, like slavery and, again, the oppression of black people leading up to the passage of civil rights, and even, in certain instances, beyond. The idea that it's against both sides thing. Yeah, violence was committed against black people, but they also committed acts of violence themselves. Kind of a both sides issue. Or with slavery. Yeah, slavery, people were, taken in forced labor, lived under the threat of violence, were killed when they were no longer of use, were sold as chattel. But along the way, they developed certain skills that they could be used for their personal benefit. When would that personal benefit manifest? Well, if they were no longer slaves, which of course they were. So it's preposterous, it's absurd, it's incredibly offensive, and it's ahistorical. It's not just that it's really tacky and disgusting and despicable, even on its merits in terms of the historical accuracy. It's just not accurate, right? And this is the danger that we see from activist conservatives in states like Florida. We have no reason to believe that it'll stop here because, again, this is part of like an ongoing mission of Republicans in Florida to try to rewrite history. And you can bet that if they get national power again, they'll take those steps and try to apply it to the whole country.